Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Coding and Philosophy podcast. I'm Juho.
And my name is Tri.
Yeah. Let Juho put on the headphones as well. Okay, now we're all set. Today we're gonna continue our discussion about the last podcast we talked about the sprint methodology and basically sprint planning sessions.
Yes.
And this time we're gonna talk about what stories are.
Stories, user stories.
Yeah, user stories.
That's what we promised to the listeners last time. Today that in this podcast we discuss about user stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just a short review or recap of the sprint planning sessions. They are the sessions you host every, let's say, 2 weeks, where you discuss what are the tasks, aka stories, you're gonna start doing for the sprint. And what are those stories? So basically the idea behind using stories instead of writing a task list, which you do, is because, as humans, we actually understand the world through stories, or we identify with stories much more than just as, let's say the motivation, we're touched by stories.
We're touched by story. I can see we're touched by coherence. We're touched by a narration, so there are connections between elements in a living, and we're touched by emotions, and stories embed those elements in that form.
And a basic example of a user story is, you write the user story like this: as a user, I want X so that X happens, which is basically a short story that you could publish and have people read anyway. So that the idea here is that you're really thinking like the user. So because I remember one of my biggest problems, when doing development, working in a development team, was thinking like the user, because I had my own way of testing and trying out and using the application I was building, and which wasn't at all how the actual end users used it. So it's very important that developers have think like the user, and stories, and try to empathize with the user, and that stories are a really good way of helping out with that.
How are the stories constructed during the sprint planning?
Well, they're written. There's a framework for that. Meaning, there's as I explained previously, you write, for example, as a user, I would like to mark, let's say, some social media posts, or create ready-made social media posts that I will be published in the future, so that I don't have to write them out individually and publish on the day. You know what I mean? So basically, to clarify a bit more, I was working on this software which allowed users to plan out their social media post across platforms. So you could make okay, I'm going to have a Facebook post that's going to be published next week on Monday at 5 p.m. and I'm going to write it out already, so that I don't have to do that Facebook post at next week Monday at 10 p.m. I can save it, and then it's going to be automatically published. So a user story and the value for that is, you're able to use your time more efficiently, or you can plan out your kind of days better. You're not set to this specific time where you need to publish the post. because there's optimal times where you want to publish social media posts. You can optimize anything. But anyway, so how do you break that down into a user story? Is as a user, I would like to create saved or create upcoming social media posts so that I can use my time more efficiently. That would be the story of that task. And then, the idea is that the developer would empathize with the user once they hear that, instead of just if you explain it to the developer in a way, if you just created a task rather than a story, it would be just it would just be a bunch of technical specs.
Yes, it's object-oriented task.
Yeah, which
some people can work with that.
Yeah,
some people can be hyper efficient with that.
That's true, but the danger I really think is that the developers then aren't identifying with the user. They aren't thinking who's actually gonna use the software. And I think you can still have a bunch of, let's say, if you're very technical and solution-oriented rather than people-oriented in a way, you can still have those stories. They're written in a more technical way, in a more academic way, if that makes sense.
Academic is different from technical, just have to point that out.
Well,
but it falls under the umbrella of the scientific word field, which is objective and object-oriented.
Well, perhaps. But yeah, so the point here is that the user stories help the developers identify and empathize with the user, because that was, speaking from personal experience, that was one of my biggest problems as a developer.
And who during the meeting, the sprint planning to be exact, write those stories?
We wrote them together. And the way we did it is that the person who most likely was gonna build that feature was the one writing it. Because, that's the thing about making notes, is that you remember what you write much more clearly in a way. And writing is a form of thinking, I guess. And the other reason is, once the person who is going to do the feature or do the story is writing it, they are taking ownership of that story. So they kind of feel responsible and feel more responsibility towards finishing it.
There's one feature at a time during each sprint, isn't it?
One feature meaning?
One feature. How many? When I say feature, I imagine an objective during each sprint.
Yeah. So every sprint you write down the sprint objective. What would you, or the product owner writes it down, because, he's the one arguing for the value for the user. He's in there. Yeah.
How can you describe the objective? Is it in terms of the feature? And how does the objective be broken down into the user stories?
It's written from the point of what do the users want? Like, what is the thing that the users really want from the software right now? And you try to kind of condense that into a single sentence, an action statement.
An action statement.
Yeah.
And is that the objective of the sprint?
Yeah, so you have that as an objective.
And then the developers break that down into the story in terms of users and their actions and the expected output and the value.
The way it works is that you have the product owner who breaks that condensed action statement into multiple of these stories. And then, it's up to the developer to, the stories are written by the product owner because they require no technical knowledge to write, actually. And they shouldn't. That's the important thing, is that every single story is understandable by everyone. Anyone could read it and understand what this is. So Yeah, and the way you get that is that you have them you have the product owner in present when you're writing those, so that he or she understands, like, okay, I know what this story is.
And then
Makes sense.
an objective being broken down into multiple stories that represents the actions and the values of the users, and the developers to intake that stories and then work to the product.
You're gonna have to repeat that. I'm not sure I understood what you meant.
I just revised what you just said. The product owner state the objectives in terms of the user's perspectives. What will the users do and what they value of? And then the product owner breaks that statement down into stories, multiple stories, in line with that objective. That those component stories also describe what the users do and what do they receive as the value.
Yeah, I think the perfect way to simplify this is that, well, you have, let's take a movie example. Well, you could boil down the Batman trilogy into a single action statement of what actually happens in the Batman beats up criminals. That would be the main story. It's condensed into one. But then you have a bunch of characters in that story. Have you seen the Nolan Batman trilogy?
Nolan Batman trilogy.
Yeah.
Yes.
I started explaining about it before, confirming with you. But anyway, so you have the Joker, who has his own story. You have Batman. You have Gordon, Commissioner Gordon. You have all these personas, each with their individual stories, and their objectives. What do they want to accomplish? So that's the way you can see the software development stories. Is that?
See.
Yeah, you have it's the biggest form is called an epic, and an epic is constructed out of multiple stories which branch out into sub-stories. So yeah, you could, an example could be the Batman trilogy is the epic of Batman fighting criminals to save Gotham. And then you have let's say the main story.
The main story.
Which is, this, how to condense it? Batman goes to, he goes to multiple countries and catches the criminals in, these multiple countries. He goes to, I think, China, where he catches that Lao guy. But anyway, so he catches multiple criminals all around Gotham. And then, all those criminals can have their own sub-stories. So, this thinking about stories of, the way the whole story system came from, let's say, the media or the agile methodology, or this whole story writing, how it arrived to software development, it was absorbed from these stories that have all been written throughout history,
Throughout history.
So
the first medium of human understanding the world. That's the first way human understand the world before the scientific worldview.
Yeah, and I think it's a very powerful medium. And I don't think the scientific worldview has replaced the importance of stories.
But the scientific worldview offer powerful technological manipulations.
Yeah, but the way humans still understand the world is through stories, I would argue. Because we are, like we discussed, we're touched by stories. We're not really touched by scientific data. unless we know what the implications of it are to humanity. And that's a story in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have some scientist who figures out has a problem. He figures out a solution, and that solution has implications to humanity itself. We are touched by that story, not necessarily by the scientific revelation or the discovery by itself. Yeah. But I think that wraps up this episode.
Let's wrap up this episode.
Yeah. We thank you again and see you next time.
And remember, keep on coding.
And philosophizing. Bye.
Goodbye.